She called the cops on me, then cried when she heard my sentence. The police lights painted our living room blue and red, strobing across the walls like a heartbeat I couldn't control. Maris stood behind the officers, arms wrapped around herself, crying in a way that looked rehearsed. I was barefoot. My socks were still on the bedroom floor. The carpet felt rough under my feet as the officer asked me to turn around. I did. The cuffs were colder than I expected. Metal bit into my wrists and clicked twice. I kept asking what I did wrong. The officer didn't answer. He just guided me toward the door with a hand on my shoulder, firm but not rough. Maris wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor, shaking her head like I'd already confessed to something. Our coffee mugs were still on the counter, steam rising. Everything normal except the lights and the metal and the fact that my wife was crying to strangers instead of talking to me. She whispered to the officer that she was afraid. That word hung in the air like smoke. I heard it even though she said it quietly, like she didn't want me to hear but knew I would. Afraid. Of me. I'd known Maris for 6 years, married for 4. I'd never raised a hand, never threatened. We argued. Sure, everyone argues, but afraid? The officer wrote something down. Maris nodded. Her hands were trembling, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke. Controlled. Like she'd practiced this. I wanted to ask her what she was doing, but the other officer told me to stay quiet. So I did. I stood there in handcuffs, barefoot, watching my wife perform fear for an audience of 2 strangers who believed her without question. The living room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I couldn't breathe right. My chest tightened. I kept thinking this was temporary, a mistake, something we'd laugh about later maybe, but Maris still wouldn't look at me. Our neighbors watched from their porches as I was led outside. Mrs. Tennyson stood on her steps with her arms crossed. Mr. Raj was by his mailbox, phone out, filming. I saw the red recording light. The officer guided me down our walkway, past the garden Maris and I planted last spring. The tulips were just starting to bloom. Someone's dog barked. The street smelled like fresh-cut grass and gasoline. I kept my head down, but I could feel their eyes. Every single one. Judging. Assuming. Deciding who I was based on the cuffs and the lights and the fact that my wife was still inside crying. Maris didn't stop them. She didn't come to the door. She didn't say it was a misunderstanding. She stayed inside while I was walked to the cruiser like a criminal. And that silence said more than any words could. I wanted to shout that this was wrong, that I didn't do anything. But my throat closed up. So I just walked. In the back of the cruiser, I replayed the argument. It started over dishes, something stupid. I said she never cleaned up after herself. She said I always made her feel guilty. Voices got louder. I called her careless. She called me controlling. We both said things we shouldn't have, but there were no threats, no hands raised, no furniture thrown. Just words. Angry, messy, human words. The kind couples say when they're tired and frustrated and don't know how to communicate anymore. I stared out the window as the cruiser pulled away from our house. The streetlights blurred past. My wrists ached from the cuffs. I kept thinking about the moment before she called. She'd grabbed her phone and locked herself in the bathroom. I knocked. Asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. Then I heard her voice, low and shaky, and I realized she was talking to someone. 5 minutes later, the sirens came. That's all it took. 5 minutes to turn a marriage into this. My name is Jonah Pell, and the night my wife called the cops on me was the night my life split in 2. Before and after. Before I was a husband, a project manager at a construction firm, a guy who coached Little League on weekends and fixed the neighbor's fence without asking for anything in return. After, I was a case number, a risk, a statistic. I didn't know that yet. Sitting in that cruiser, but I'd learn. I'd learn how fast people believe the worst when the story's already written for them. How a single phone call can become a record that follows you everywhere. How silence can be the loudest lie. Maris knew what she was doing when she made that call. Maybe not the full weight of it, not the years it would carry, but she knew. She chose the nuclear option because it was easier than the truth. And the truth was simple. We fought. I didn't hurt her. But hurt comes in more forms than bruises. And she was about to teach me that. I told myself it was panic. That Maris overreacted, that the truth would fix everything once things calmed down. People do irrational things when emotions run high, right? She was scared, not of me, but of the argument, of the tension, of feeling cornered. I built the story in my head, the one where she'd realize her mistake and take it back, where she'd call the police station and say she exaggerated, that it was a fight, not a crime. I imagined her showing up at the jail with apologies and explanations. I imagined us sitting down with a mediator, working through it like adults. I imagined a lot of things that never happened. Because hope is easier than accepting that someone you love chose cruelty. It's easier to believe in misunderstandings than malice. So I sat in that holding cell and convinced myself this was temporary. A bad night, a story we'd tell someday with nervous laughter. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. In holding, I memorized the cracks in the wall and practiced apologies she never asked for. The cell smelled like disinfectant and old sweat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few minutes. There were 3 other guys in there with me. One slept on the bench, another paced, the third just stared at nothing. I sat on the cold concrete floor and went over every word I'd said to Maris, every tone, every gesture, trying to find the thing that justified this, trying to understand what I'd done that was so terrible it required police intervention. I came up empty. So I started drafting apologies in my head. I'm sorry I raised my voice. I'm sorry I made you feel unsafe. I'm sorry I didn't see how bad things had gotten. I practiced saying them out loud quietly so the other guys wouldn't hear. I wanted to be ready. I wanted to fix this the second I got the chance. But Maris never came. And those apologies just sat in my chest, undelivered, turning sour. Maris didn't answer my calls. Her silence felt heavier than the charges. I was allowed 1 call from holding, and I used it on her. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same thing. Voicemail. Her voice, bright and familiar, asking me to leave a message. I didn't. What would I even say? By morning, I'd been transferred to county. I tried calling from there too. A guard let me use the phone for 3 minutes. I dialed. It rang. She didn't pick up. I called her mom. No answer. I called our mutual friend, Cassie. She answered but said she couldn't talk and hung up before I could explain. That's when I realized Maris had already spoken to everyone. She'd told her version, shaped the narrative. And in that version, I was the villain. My silence didn't matter. My side of the story didn't matter. She'd filled the space with her truth, and there was no room left for mine. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I hung up and didn't try again. At the arraignment, the judge read words that didn't sound like they belonged to me. Domestic. Risk. Protection order. I stood there in an orange jumpsuit that smelled like bleach and someone else's body odor, hands cuffed in front of me, listening to my life described in legal terms I barely understood. The courtroom was cold. Fluorescent. The judge's voice was flat, procedural, like he'd said these same words 1,000 times before. My public defender, Rafe Calder, stood beside me. He'd introduced himself 10 minutes earlier in a hallway that smelled like floor cleaner. He told me to stay quiet and let him handle it. So I did. I stood there while the prosecutor listed allegations, while the judge set bail, while my wife sat 3 rows back, crying softly into a tissue. She looked small, fragile, like the victim everyone already believed she was. And maybe she was. Just not of me, of her own choices. But no one was asking that question. Maris sat behind the prosecutor, eyes red, hands folded, like a stranger who knew my name. I kept glancing back at her, trying to catch her eye, trying to find some flicker of recognition, some acknowledgement that this was us, that we'd shared a bed and a life and a future. But she stared at the table in front of her, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. She wore the blue sweater I bought her last Christmas. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, the way she always wore it when she was stressed. She looked like Maris, sounded like Maris when she answered the prosecutor's questions in a quiet, shaky voice. But the woman sitting there wasn't the person I married. Or maybe she was, and I just never saw this part of her. The part that could sit in a courtroom and let a lie grow roots. The part that could cry on cue. The part that weaponized vulnerability. When the hearing ended, she left through a side door. Didn't look back, didn't hesitate, just walked out like I was already gone. Rafe Calder told me the case didn't need truth, it needed probability. And probability wasn't on my side. We sat in a small conference room at the courthouse, the kind with no windows and a table bolted to the floor. Rafe had a yellow notepad covered in illegible handwriting. He leaned back in his chair and sighed like he'd had this conversation 100 times before. "Here's the reality," he said. "Doesn't matter what actually happened. Matters what she says happened. Matters what the system believes. And the system believes women in these situations. Every time." I asked if the truth mattered at all. He shrugged. "Truth's subjective. Evidence is what counts, and right now all the evidence is her word against yours. Guess which one the court trusts more?" I sat there stunned. I'd grown up believing the justice system was fair, that innocence meant something. Rafe crushed that belief in under 5 minutes. He wasn't cruel, just honest. And honesty, I was learning, hurt worse than lies. Because lies left room for hope. Honesty just left you raw. I learned Maris never corrected the report. Not once. Not even privately. Rafe showed me the police statement. Maris had told the officers I yelled at her, cornered her in the hallway, and made her feel threatened. She said I had a history of losing my temper, that she was afraid I'd escalate. None of it was true. I'd raised my voice, sure, but cornered her? Threatened her? No, never. I asked Rafe if there was any chance she'd clarified later. Maybe called the station and said it was exaggerated. Maybe told someone it was just an argument that got out of hand. He shook his head. If she did, it's not in the file. And if it's not in the file, it didn't happen. I felt something crack inside me. A small, quiet break. Because silence is a choice. And Maris chose not to correct the record. She let the lie sit, let it calcify, let it become my reality. She could have stopped this at any point. One phone call, one honest conversation, but she didn't. And that told me everything I needed to know. Friends stopped calling. My job let me go, temporarily, then never called back. I posted bail and moved into a motel off Highway 9. The kind with a flickering vacancy sign and a vending machine that only took exact change. I called my boss, explained the situation. He said he understood, that they'd hold my position, that we'd figure it out. 2 weeks later I got an email. Budget cuts. Restructuring. My position had been eliminated. I knew what it really was. No one wants to employ a guy with pending domestic charges. Does it matter if they're true? The stain's already there. My friends were quieter. Text messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped. The few people who'd reach out spoke in careful, distant tones. Like I was contagious. Like associating with me might rub off. I didn't blame them. Not really. It's easier to believe the version of events that doesn't require uncomfortable questions. Easier to ghost someone than to stand beside them when the whole world's already made up its mind. So I stopped reaching out. Stopped explaining. Just went quiet. From a distance, Maris posted about healing and bravery. People praised her strength. I found out through Cassie, who still followed Maris on social media. She sent me a screenshot. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Maris had posted a photo of herself at sunrise, coffee in hand, staring out at the ocean. The caption read, "Learning to rebuild after surviving what I never thought I'd have to survive. Grateful for the people who stood by me. Healing isn't linear, but I'm here." 300 likes. Dozens of comments. "You're so strong. Proud of you. You deserve peace." My stomach turned. She'd framed herself as a survivor, as someone who'd escaped danger, and maybe, in her mind, she had. Maybe she genuinely believed I was a threat. Or maybe she just needed the narrative, needed the sympathy, needed people to see her as brave instead of seeing the truth, that she'd made a choice in anger and let it spiral into something she couldn't take back. Either way, she was healing, and I was the wreckage. I realized the lie wasn't impulsive. It was convenient. Lying in that motel room, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I replayed everything. The argument, the phone call, the way she spoke to the officers, the way she sat in court. None of it felt panicked. None of it felt accidental. It felt strategic, because the truth was messy. The truth required her to admit we were both at fault, that we'd both said cruel things, that the marriage was failing and neither of us knew how to fix it. The truth meant vulnerability, accountability, work. The lie was easier. The lie gave her an escape hatch, a clean break, a story people would rally behind. And Maris always hated confrontation. Always avoided hard conversations. This was just another version of that. Instead of sitting down and saying, "I want a divorce," she called the cops and let the system do the talking. It was convenient, efficient, and it destroyed me. But I don't think she cared. Or maybe she cared and did it anyway. I'm still not sure which is worse. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read the sentence. Months, programs, records that don't fade. I stood there, hands gripping the table in front of me, trying to keep my breathing steady. Rafe had warned me this was coming. He'd tried to negotiate, tried to get the charges reduced, but the prosecutor wanted a win, and Maris's testimony was compelling. The judge leaned forward, reading from a sheet of paper in a voice that sounded almost bored. 6 months in county, anger management classes, probation, a permanent protection order, and a record. A record that would follow me for the rest of my life. Background checks, job applications, housing forms, it would all be there. Domestic violence. The judge finished reading and looked at me. "Do you understand the terms of this sentence, Mr. Pell?" I nodded. My voice came out hoarse. "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel came down, sharp, final. And that was it. My life, rewritten in under a minute. I stared straight ahead until I heard Maris gasp behind me. It was small, almost inaudible, but I heard it. A sharp intake of breath like she'd been slapped. I didn't turn around. Didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my face, but I felt her presence, felt the weight of her realizations settling into the room. The bailiff stepped forward, gesturing for me to follow. I moved mechanically, one foot in front of the other. My hands were cuffed again. The metal bit into my wrists, but I barely felt it. I was numb, hollowed out. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People shuffled papers. The prosecutor packed up her briefcase. Routine. Just another day. Just another case. But for me, it was the end of everything. And for Maris, apparently, it was the beginning of regret. I wondered if she thought it would be lighter. A slap on the wrist, community service, something symbolic. But 6 months isn't symbolic. It's real. And reality, I'd learned, has teeth. She whispered, "I didn't know it would be this long." I heard her voice crack. Heard the disbelief. Like she'd expected the system to go easier. Like she thought I'd get a warning and we'd all move on. But that's not how it works. Once you set the machine in motion, you don't get to control where it stops. The prosecutor had pushed for the maximum, made an example, and the judge had agreed. Maris's lie had grown into something bigger than both of us. It wasn't just about the argument anymore. It was about precedent, about sending a message, about making sure men like me knew there were consequences. Except I wasn't men like me. I was just a guy who'd fought with his wife and lost everything because she couldn't admit the fight was mutual. I could feel her staring at my back, could feel her trying to will me to turn around, but I didn't. I kept my eyes forward, kept my face blank, because I didn't owe her anything. Not anymore. Not after this. For the first time she reached for me. And the bailiff stepped between us. I heard the movement, heard her chair scrape back, heard her say my name, Jonah, soft, pleading, like we were still people who loved each other. The bailiff moved quickly, stepping between us with a firm but polite, "Ma'am, please stay seated." I didn't turn around, didn't stop walking. My lawyer had told me not to engage, not to give her anything that could be twisted later. So I didn't. I let the bailiff guide me through the side door, down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner, and into a holding area where I'd wait to be processed. I could still hear her voice in my head. That one word, my name, spoken like it meant something, like it could undo the last 6 months, like reaching for me could erase the lie she'd told and the life she'd destroyed. But it couldn't. And somewhere, deep down, I think she knew that. I think that's why she cried. That was the moment I understood. She wanted control, not consequences. Maris wanted me gone, wanted space, wanted to win the argument without having to actually communicate. And calling the cops gave her that. It gave her control, power, the final word. But consequences? She never thought about those, never imagined I'd actually be sentenced, never imagined it would be real. She thought the system would scare me, teach me a lesson, put me in my place, and then we'd move on. But the system doesn't work that way. It's not a tool you use and put away. It's a beast, and once you feed it, it doesn't stop eating. Maris fed it a lie, and it devoured both of us. She just didn't realize she'd be swallowed too. Guilt, regret, the weight of knowing she'd destroyed someone she once loved. That was her sentence, and unlike mine, hers didn't have an end date. It would follow her forever. Every time someone asked about me, every time she looked in the mirror, every time she tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I stopped writing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to be understood. In county, I kept my head down, followed the rules, did my time. I wrote letters at first, to Maris, to friends, to anyone who might listen, long, detailed explanations of what really happened, of how I wasn't the monster everyone thought I was, but no one wrote back, no one cared. So I stopped. I stopped defending myself, stopped trying to make people see the truth, because the truth didn't matter. Not to them. They'd already decided who I was, and nothing I said would change that. So I went quiet. I read, I worked out, I took the anger management classes and nodded along when the instructor talked about de-escalation and healthy communication. I didn't argue, didn't push back. I just existed, and slowly something shifted. The anger I'd been carrying started to fade. Not because I forgave Maris, but because I realized holding on to it was giving her power she didn't deserve, so I let it go. Not for her, for me. Inside I rebuilt slowly, routine, discipline, clarity. No rage, no collapse. I woke up at the same time every day, made my bunk, ate breakfast in the common area, read in the yard when the weather was decent, worked in the library when it wasn't. I avoided drama, avoided the guys who thrived on chaos. I found a rhythm, a structure, and in that structure, I found clarity. I started to see my marriage for what it was. Not a love story, not a partnership, but a slow erosion of self. Maris didn't call the cops because of one argument. She called because she'd been looking for a way out and didn't know how to use her words. She'd been unhappy for months, maybe years, and instead of saying that, she weaponized fear. But I'd been unhappy too. I just hadn't admitted it. I'd stayed because staying felt easier than leaving. But easy isn't the same as right. And now, sitting in a cell, I had the space to see that. To see her. To see myself. And to realize I didn't want to go back. Outside, Maris unraveled. Guilt doesn't need bars to trap you. I didn't see it firsthand, but I heard. Cassie visited once, 3 months into my sentence. She looked uncomfortable the entire time, fidgeting with her hands, avoiding eye contact, but she talked. Told me Maris wasn't doing well, that she'd stopped posting online, stopped seeing friends, that she'd dropped out of her book club and quit her yoga class, that she spent most nights alone, crying. Cassie said Maris felt horrible, that she hadn't expected things to go this far, that she wanted to take it back, but didn't know how. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Maris made her choice, and now she was living with it. Guilt is a prison too. One without walls or guards or release dates. It just sits inside you, eating away, reminding you of what you did and who you hurt. And Maris was drowning in it. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the whole thing. Tired of caring. Years later she asked if we could talk. I said nothing. I was out. Had been for 2 years. I'd moved to a different city. Found work in a warehouse. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I kept to myself. Built a small, quiet life. No drama. No chaos. Then one day, I got an email from Maris. Subject line, please read. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was long. Apologetic. She said she was sorry, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she thought about me every day, that she wanted to explain, to talk, to make things right. She left her phone number at the bottom. I read it twice, then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond, didn't call, didn't engage, because some damage can't be undone, some bridges can't be rebuilt, and I didn't owe her closure, didn't owe her forgiveness. She wanted to talk, to absolve herself, to feel better. But that wasn't my job anymore. So I deleted the email. And I moved on. She called the cops to punish a moment. The sentence didn't break me, it freed me. I don't think about Maris much anymore. Occasionally I'll see something that reminds me of her. A blue sweater, a song we used to listen to, and I'll feel a flicker of something. Not anger, not sadness, just acknowledgement. That chapter of my life is closed. She tried to punish me for making her feel small during one argument, but in doing so she gave me the space to become someone bigger, someone clearer, someone who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. The sentence was hard, the time was brutal, but it taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. About resilience. About who I am when everything's stripped away. About the difference between being broken and being rebuilt. Maris lost me the night she made that call. But I didn't lose myself. I found myself. In a cell. In silence. In the realization that the worst thing someone can do to you sometimes becomes the best thing that ever happened. I'm free now. In every sense of the word. And she's still trapped. Still carrying what she did. That's her sentence. And it's the one she earned.